This is LING 270, Language, Technology, and Society, Module 7, Intro to Language Technologies. In this lesson, we'll be talking about how typing works in other languages. So let's remember that when the QWERTY keyboard was developed, it was primarily developed to prevent type jams, and that meant that keys which occur frequently together in English should be spaced apart from one another. Now notice that this was developed specifically for English. What if we, keys which, or letters which tend to occur together in other languages might be different. So because of this, other keyboards have to adapt to other languages as well, and might make things more ergonomically as well. So what we see is that in Europe, most keyboards are actually very similar to the QWERTY keyboard, or even use just the QWERTY keyboard with some minor modifications, such as adding some diacritics and things like that. But yeah, for the most part, most European keyboards use the QWERTY keyboard as its basic type. We'll also talk about how other languages which don't use alphabets, how typing works in those languages. In particular, we'll look how Chinese typing works. We'll also look at the interesting case of the Chinese typewriter, which was invented, which was actually invented, but it was not widely used. It was just not feasible. We'll look at how instead that typing in Chinese tends to work more phonetically and by shape-based typing systems. So these are the kinds of alternatives. So I have a video in the video series here showing a demonstration of a Chinese typewriter. It shows a keyboard layout with thousands of keys, one for each character. You can see from this video just how slow the process of typing is with a Chinese typewriter. And the individual you see in this video is actually a trained typist, one of the faster ones. The types are laid out in a way that are they're laid out by shape, so they're well organized and it can be relatively easy to find them, but it's actually very difficult to type this. And you'll even notice that in some cases there is a whole set of type bars on the side in case the character you want to type isn't in the keyboard layout that you have in front of you. So that just adds another layer of complexity. And so for this reason, typewriters just didn't really become widespread in Chinese, and other typing systems became developed later. So let's first look at how the French keyboard layout kind of works. So the French keyboard is called the AZERTY keyboard. So we can see that the keyboard actually looks very similar to the QWERTY, but the A and the Q were switched and the Z and the W were switched. So those probably made some modifications that made typing much more ergonomic in French, but we can still see that nonetheless, the QWERTY keyboard layout was still very influential in the development of the French keyboard. If we look at German, we see what we can call the Querz keyboard, so QWERTZ. So this keyboard is basically the QWERTY keyboard layout, but switching Z and Y. So still very similar to the QWERTY keyboard, but some minor modifications to make typing easier in these languages. We can also see the influence of QWERTY even on other alphabetic systems. So if we look at the Greek alphabet, we'll see that a lot of the keys in these keyboards is basically just the replacement of its counterpart in the Latin alphabet. For example, the sigma character is typed where the S is on the QWERTY keyboard, and delta is typed where the D key is, and so on and so forth. So we can see that the QWERTY keyboard was actually very influential here as well. Now, a language where the QWERTY keyboard wasn't really very influential was the Russian keyboard. So the Russian keyboard layout was actually more adapted to the Russian language in the same way that QWERTY was adapted for English. So this is called the JCU Ken keyboard layout. There have been some phonetic keyboard layouts that were developed in the same way that the Greek systems that were used, but these aren't very commonly used in Russia. It's the JCU Ken system is much more common. So I've mentioned how difficult it is to, in Chinese, to make a single key with every symbol that can be used in the writing system. So there needs to be some other kind of system that actually enables Chinese to be properly typed. One way, there are many ways that Chinese can actually be typed, one of which is using a QWERTY keyboard to type the pinyin romanization. So recall from earlier modules where we talked about how Chinese can be represented in the Latin alphabet. So because of this, there has been a typing system developed where you can type using a QWERTY keyboard the pinyin, and then a software system will give some suggestions as to which characters have that kind of pronunciation. Now the thing is, this kind of keyboard layout tends to be a little bit slower compared to the other alternatives that they exist, but it is much more intuitive and much more easy to learn. So that's something to keep in mind. Now there is another way that Chinese keyboards can be laid out, which is by shape. So the Cangjie method, where characters are typed by typing a series of simple characters. So each of the symbols on the Cangjie keyboard layout actually correspond to a single component of a character. So if you look at the symbol on the top left here, where you type the OIAR, we can see how typing these 4 component characters together kind of results in the final larger character there. So here you type, you generate characters by building up the character layout in succession. Now, as you can see, this system can be a little bit counterintuitive in sometimes. It does require strong knowledge of the stroke patterns of the Chinese writing system, but this system is faster to type than the phonetic keyboards. So this is an important distinction to make. So it's also interesting to see how the Hangul writing system is adapted for in a keyboard system. So remember that the Korean writing system Hangul is actually alphabetic. Although the symbols are written in syllable blocks, they contain components which corresponds to consonants and vowels. And in that way, it lends itself to be easily represented on a keyboard. What's also interesting is that remember that an optimal keyboard will have commonly occurring characters that are commonly written next to each other. It's good to have those letters on opposite sides of the keyboard so you can type them in rapid succession. And we see this fact being exploited in the Korean keyboard, where all the consonants are laid out on the left and all the vowels are laid out on the right. And what happens is, as you type these letter systems, the syllable block will gradually be built up in the software that you're using. So this is how typing works in Korean. Now, remember also going back to our writing systems unit, how the Japanese writing system actually works. So remember that Japanese actually uses 3 different writing systems. It uses kanji, which is a logography, which is based off of the Chinese writing system. And it also uses 2 syllabaries. So all of these writing systems use a very large number of symbols, which don't easily fit on a keyboard. So because of this, Japanese is like Chinese is most often typed phonetically using the QWERTY keyboard. And it uses the Romaji, the romanization system, to actually do this. So you type the romanized version of Japanese, and then the software suggests what word has that kind of spelling. So this is how the keyboard can be used to type a language like Japanese with such a diversity of writing systems. So to summarize what we've covered in this module, we've seen that how QWERTY was developed specifically for English, so some modifications have to be made in order for other languages to be typed. However, most adaptations are usually very minor adaptations of QWERTY. So we see that the German keyboard is really just switching the Y and the Z, and the Azerty keyboard is basically just switching the Q and the A and the W and the Z. So very slight modifications. but they were done to make it more optimal for those languages. We've also seen how typing in writing systems which are not alphabets can be accomplished. Very frequently, this is a phonetic process, which also uses the QWERTY keyboard. And this just goes to show how influential the QWERTY keyboard has been since it was developed in 1878. And we've also seen that there are some languages like Chinese can be typed in many different ways. So it can also be typed in using a shape-based system as well. And we've seen that if we wanted to actually make a single symbol, make a typewriter using a single stamp for every single character in the Chinese writing system, it is possible, but it is basically not feasible. So that's why these other alternative methods for typing Chinese have been developed.